Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to St. John's First Evangelical Lutheran Church in Bridgeton, New Jersey's hybrid Bible study on the book of Genesis. And today we will be looking at chapter number 37, where we will look at Joseph's dreams, his incredible coat, the feelings of his brothers and him being sold off into slavery, and all the interesting nuances that are a part and parcel of this fascinating chapter, which of course they all are, of the book of Genesis. Now, the first thing I would like us to focus on today is verse 3. Israel, do you remember who that is? Yes, that is indeed Joseph's father, Jacob. He loved him more than any other of his sons because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors, as it says here in my English Standard Version translation. Now, before we go any further, I would like to share two words with you. The first one is in Hebrew and the second is in Greek. The Hebrew word is pasim, which can be translated into English as long-sleeved. Now, the Greek word I would like to share with you is poikilos, and poikilos is translated into English as multicolored. Now, of course, the Old Testament was originally written predominantly in Hebrew. Now, the Old Testament has been translated into English, of course, because we can read it in front of us, but of course it was also translated a long time ago into Greek. So the translation of some of our Bible verses that we see in our English translations are taken from what is known as the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. What I would like to emphasize here is that it's very important to go back to the original language because, as we all know, things can often be lost in translation. What might make sense in English will not make as much sense in Spanish or in French, in our modern day speak, just as it would. You kind of translate the original Hebrew, but you kind of don't get the real overall feeling for it in our present day vernacular. So it's something to take into consideration. Is it long-sleeved? Is it actually multicolored? Again, I would encourage you to maybe do a bit more research on that if you're so inclined. There's a lot of information out there. But what really is interesting here, what I wanted to emphasize, is the importance of going back to the original languages. Now, what we see here, more crucially, one would argue, is that Joseph's brothers could not stand him. They could not speak peacefully to him. Now, when Joseph had a dream, when he talked about sheaves and how his arose and stood upright, but their sheaves, the other sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf. Are you indeed to reign over us, the brothers said, or are you indeed to rule over us? They hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. The next dream, of course, would only further antagonize his brothers, and it even annoyed his father, but he did kind of say here that it was taken to his mind, to his consideration. Of course, very important things to take into account here today. Now, what we have seen in our previous forays into the book of Genesis is this whole concept of dreams. Now, dreams, as we have seen them before in Genesis 20, Genesis 28, Genesis 31, and also later on in 40 and 41, all have these divine revelations associated with them. So what is being foretold in these dreams is precisely what is going to happen. So that's what we can see here as well, because as we know, if we have read this Joseph story before in the book of Genesis, we know that there would be a time of plenty, there would be a time of famine, and how the brothers would eventually seek him out. Of course, no more spoilers at this point, but yes, very important to take into consideration. Now, the brothers hated him very much so, and they wanted to kill him, it says in verse 18. However, in verse 21, when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." How very nice of him to save his brother. But of course, as we remember from last time, Reuben had tried to usurp, so to speak, his father's authority as the head of the household by doing a terrible act. Now, wouldn't you suggest, perhaps, maybe you have a different opinion? If you do, please share those if you are so inclined, in the comments section below. That he knows that relations are now strained with his father, and now he can go and tell his dad, look, my other brothers try to take your favorite son's life. They hate him. They want to take him away from you forever. But I stood strong against my other brothers, and I saved his life. Father, forgive me. Father, know that I am your son and that I love you. He is trying to restore himself to his father's favor. Again, mankind, as much as we like to think so, is not capable of perfection and purity. There is more often than not an ulterior motive to things. So yes, a very important thing to take into consideration right now. Now also, verse 23. Listen to what the words are here and see if you can see any parallels with the New Testament. When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors, the long-sleeved robe, however we like to translate it. They took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. They stripped him of his robe. Those are the key words there. What does that remind you of? Fingers crossed, it reminds you of Jesus on the cross and how his clothes were taken from him. Also, we think of the pit. We think of the darkness of Sheol in the Old Testament. We think of Jesus being put into the tomb, the dark tomb. But the tomb could not contain Jesus, of course, and he rose victorious. He rose valiantly from the grave 3 days later. Something else to very much take into consideration here today as well. Now, Judah, a very important son. Of course, we know of the tribe of Judah. We think of David. We think of Jesus. But as we will find out next week, another brief spoiler, Judah was far from perfect. However, what we see here is him saying, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. Of course, Ishmaelites, we remember God's promise to Ishmael a long time ago in a previous Bible study, how he would have many descendants. Here they are. So Midianite traders passed by. They drew Joseph up out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes, tearing his clothes, a sign, a symbol of heartbreak, of anguish, pain, often associated with mourning as, well, the boy is gone and where shall I go? Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the robe of many colors, or the long-sleeved tunic, however you like to translate it, and brought it to their father and said, this we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not. This whole idea of deception, which we have seen, of course, throughout this whole account of Jacob with his mother, with his uncle. And here there is more deception in this family line taking place right now. They're trying to convince their father that something terrible has happened to their fellow brother, Joseph, when in actual fact they had just sold him off into slavery. Jacob tore his garments and put sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son for many days. Natural reaction, of course. Right. Okay, anything else that we want to talk about today in Genesis chapter 37? Judah, only worried about himself. Reuben, definitely only worried about himself. The brothers only worrying about themselves, not caring one iota about their brother Joseph. They could not stand it. They wanted rid of him. They sold him. They deceived their own father. Again, very powerful stuff here in Genesis chapter 37 today. Now, next week, as I said before, and obviously what comes up to 37 is 38. So we will look at the story of Judah, something we did touch upon a little briefly in our Sunday morning Bible study, but for the sake of continuity, to make things easier to follow, we will tackle that together in our next video on May the 7th, I believe it will be. So I pray that God blesses you today. If you have any questions, please send them my way. And I look forward, God willing, to seeing you all again very soon, be it in person or here online in a future midweek devotion or hybrid Bible study. To God be all the power, to God be all the glory, today and always. Amen.